Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all here again, and to our friends online. As you know, 1 year ago tomorrow, Russia invaded Ukraine, and despite thousands of casualties, tens of thousands of casualties, and upwards of 7 million refugees, the country has been a beacon of hope. Ukraine is a symbol of democracy and of the fight for survival, really. So this very solemn anniversary gives us a reason to reflect on what has been an incredibly hard year for a lot of people. And that's why we at the Miller Center are really excited to partner with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and in particular, its Center for Global Health, and the Virginia Film Festival for the screening of Ukraine, The Human Price of War. This documentary series has featured 7 short documentaries. Today, we're going to show you a mixed tape of of those 7 films, which runs just about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion that follows. The series, if you've watched any of it, sheds light on how Russia has attacked civilian and medical targets, and it does so through interviews with Ukrainian citizens, international health and security experts. Before the film, I'd like to first thank Jody Kilbasa and Ilya Tobvis from the Virginia Film Festival, who have been great partners with us over these many years. As you all know, probably the film festival happens typically in October or November each year, but the film festival has been very creative in thinking of different times during the year to get films that are particularly relevant in the moment. So thanks to you both and to the film festival for being such great partners. And then I'm going to also right now introduce Justin Kenny, who co-directed this series with Steve Morrison. Justin is an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning journalist, and he's going to talk a little bit about the film, its origins, and what it tries to capture. Steve, who I'll interview with the other panelists, is the distinguished Schlesinger Professor here at the Miller Center, in addition to running CSIS's Global Health Policy Center. So after Justin gives you a brief preview of the film, we'll watch the film, and then Justin, Steve, and I will sit down with 3 other panelists. I'll briefly introduce those other guests, and then we'll have a discussion of the film. So thank you all for coming, and Justin, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I'd like to thank everybody here at the Miller Center and at the Virginia Film Festival for having us. It means a lot to Steve and I. Steve and I first started producing films about 7 years ago. The first, The New Barbarianism, illuminated the horrific and often underreported phenomenon of attacks on medical workers and humanitarians in today's conflicts. These war crimes are often committed by Russia. More recently, a project on HIV/AIDS, the pandemic paradox, brought us to a number of HIV/AIDS hotspots around the world, including in Ukraine. When the invasion was launched 1 year ago, Steve and I both agreed that this was something we had to document, with a particular focus on the human price of the conflict. We enlisted the help of many of our friends and contacts, members of the Ukrainian health community, experienced journalists, government officials, and experts in foreign policy, defense, human rights, global health, and other areas. Our aim is to inform policymakers, stakeholders, and the wider public, and we hope you leave here today with a better understanding of this conflict.
Every single one of us here is forced to witness merciless war crimes.
The Russian forces are hitting hospitals while they're also hitting apartment houses and other civilian objects.
It's very difficult to estimate the scale of damage or the impact on civilians in the midst of war, but we know that it's already very significant.
Indiscriminate shelling of urban centers has led to a substantial increase in the number of people seeking refuge.
they're likely to escalate a punishment campaign against the local population.
Over the past several years, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Global Health Policy Center, and the CSIS Commission on Strengthening America's Health Security have been investigating multiple human crises around the world, including attacks on medical care, refugee outflows, and the long-term consequences. With the talents within our own organization and the partners that we have been able to produce several documentaries that have included work on Ukraine as well as Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan. Over the coming weeks, we will be examining the Russian invasion in Ukraine, examining the proposition that President Putin and his military forces are going to make use of the same playbook used in Chechnya, Syria, and elsewhere in the attacks upon the civilians and the civilian sector, including the medical system in Ukraine. Our exploration will include the voices of Ukrainians on the ground, as well as diverse experts in international security, in humanitarian affairs and international law.
What they do is they target civilian houses. They target hospitals. Women are forced to give birth to children in bunkers. Kids that have cancer are supposed to live under earth. What I also witness is that the people who fight on the Russian side use cars with the Red Cross marks to carry weapon. What I also witness is that they take people, civilians, and hide behind them to move their troops forward. And this is awful.
Each day, escalation is growing, and more people are killed. Mariupol became very similar to Aleppo, where everything is destroyed. Unfortunately, we lost connections with our partners there, so we are not sure are they alive or not at the moment. This is the terrible feeling.
The point about impunity is that it feeds on itself. And as long as impunity is unchallenged, we're not in steady state. We're in a dynamic state where impunity gets worse. All of our humanitarian experience at the International Rescue Committee speaks to the need to establish clear access routes by working with local Ukrainian partners. There's civil society organizations, medical organizations, welfare organizations. And this is a gargantuan task. It's a very, very difficult task. It may become a very prolonged task, but it's a vital task, not least because access to humanitarian aid is a legal right in international law.
The Russians have come under considerable strain militarily. They've lost between 6,000 and 8,000 Russian soldiers. These are just fatalities. One generally would assume a 3-to-1 fatality to casualty rate, so 3 times that number for Russian casualties. This means that in order to clear neighborhoods and to move maneuver forces into areas, they're going to increasingly lay waste to cities to try to limit the number of casualties and fatalities to Russian soldiers.
This is not an outlier. The horrors of Bucha are actually very consistent, tragically, with what we've seen before by the Russian army.
there are lots of evidence of sexual abuse and rapes on young women and girls.
Такой операции ввоза лекарств, вывоза людей у нас погибло. У нас разбомбили всю колонну гуманитарного груза, и у нас погибли сотрудники в этой колонии. Это произошло 3 дня назад.
I felt very, very sad when Russia invaded Ukraine, because I know its impact and devastation.
But Putin retains the capacity to destroy. In 5 years in Syria, he attacked 600 medical facilities. He accomplished the same in 3 months in Ukraine. The leadership of the World Health Organization has roundly condemned Russia's behavior.
So we continue to call on the Russian Federation to stop this war.
What we have been witnessing since 24th of February is there is a lot of unpredictable. We have seen the missile strikes to number of strategic assets. We have felt it ourselves in Lviv, in Kiev, in other places where we never expected it. So nobody knows where it goes, and nobody knows when it ends.
Attacks on healthcare in the context of Ukraine and in so many other contexts, from a WHO perspective, when those attacks are intentional, when those attacks are used as a part of the tactic of war to terrorize communities, that is the essential objective in these situations. And it is very clear in international law that it is not only the responsibility of conflicting parties not to attack healthcare facilities, but to deliberately not target them. So this discussion we have around collateral damage or accidents, we have to ask our questions: how many accidents can you have before you are in a situation where it is completely and utterly unacceptable?
We're all amazed and in some ways overwhelmed by the resilience and courage of the Ukrainians in dealing with these massive attacks. But we have to keep in mind what the consequences are.
In Ukraine, we are seeing significant mental health challenges with people who have to survive daily. The air raid sirens, the bombing, and the risk of losing their life.
Но помимо бомб и всего остального, это будет превращаться в посттравматические последствия, фобии и все остальное. Это ведь не учат нас в школе, как жить при бомбежках или когда твоему сердцу будут представлять дуло, что ты будешь переживать.
The needs are massive in Ukraine, and so even with $1.5 billion in humanitarian assistance, $8.5 billion in direct budget support for the government of Ukraine, the gap between needs and resources is growing, and I think we can anticipate that gap will grow in the coming year.
The situation is definitely getting worse every day.
50% of the civilian energy infrastructure is destroyed.
A lot of the infrastructure that is being targeted will take years to replace.
Підготувати медичну систему до такої кризи майже нереально.
I don't believe Russia can break the will of the Ukrainian people.
As long as Ukraine is able to continue its supply of weapon systems, munitions from the West, it will be able to continue to fight in this war.
It has been obviously a horrific year. We're talking about the outbreak of the largest land war, the largest conflict in Europe since the end of the Second World War.
This war has taken an enormous toll on the Ukrainian society. The Russians have implemented a punishment campaign against the Ukrainian population.
The United States has formally determined that Russia has committed crimes against humanity.
They continue to use the most brutal war atrocities of looting, rape.
Сьогодні ми бачимо прицільні руйнування Росією закладів охорони здоров'я. Знищено десь 170 об'єктів закладів охорони здоров'я, зруйновано понад з різним ступенем.
We have seen so many examples of Ukrainians all across the country sacrificing so much, their lives, their children, their homes, losing so much. And that has created a much more steel will to keep fighting.
At the one-year mark of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we need to pause and reflect and consider what lies ahead in year two. In year one, Ukrainians proved their resolve to withstand the existential threat Russia poses. Ukrainians survived, they remain united, they endured, but at an extraordinary human toll, often not easy to see. The entire population subject to attacks upon power grids, water supplies, and civilian residences. Victory rests not simply on armor and technology, it rests on human and civic strength. It rests on a society that is finite, that cannot magically be doubled in size, and that does not have an inexhaustible supply of fighters. It is a nation that has to dig ever more deeply to defend itself against Russian terror, with the help of its allies.
The investigation documents how Russia appears to have both deliberately and indiscriminately targeted Ukraine's health system during its war of aggression, as part of a broader attack on Ukraine's civilian population and infrastructure. The data set shows that at least 707 violent attacks on hospitals, health workers, and other medical infrastructure have been perpetrated. These attacks have devastated Ukraine's health system during the first year of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Прямий вплив полягає в пораненнях, які відбуваються під час вогнепальних і артилерійських обстрілів, під час валів житлових будинків, соціальної інфраструктури. І прямий вплив також полягає і на психічне здоров'я, і психоемоційний стан кожного українця.
Russia began the war by claiming that Ukraine and Russia were essentially one country, that they were brothers, Slavic fellows who belonged together. And yet the manner in which they have conducted the war is hardly what you would call familial. They seem to be pursuing what you might call a destroy the country in order to save it practice of the war, including a large number of what appear to be war crimes, crimes against civilians, ethnic cleansing at times, and really notable for their insistence upon prosecuting the war outside of the boundaries of what you might consider traditional military to military conflict.
It is impossible to overstate the impact on every aspect of Ukrainian society. Let's take just a few examples economically. Ukraine's GDP has dropped 40% in the last year. That means that entire swaths of the country, entire swaths of the economy are focused solely on the war itself rather than anything that they were producing before. In terms of daily life, there's no family here. There is no part of the country that hasn't been affected. Just permeates the entire society and every single family in this country.
I think there are two likely scenarios over the course of 2023. One is that the war of attrition continues, that neither side can make any progress in political negotiations, and we see that kind of trench warfare continue. My fear is that Russian bodies continue to pile up, both wounded and dead, that the Russians continue to lash out, probably increasingly so, at the Ukrainian population. The second scenario is, particularly from the Russian side, that they decide to push for a temporary ceasefire. Now, I don't think Putin is willing to settle this war permanently. They're probably willing to fight for years if they don't get as much of Ukraine as they want right now. But a ceasefire would mean we'd get a temporary halt for some period of time. I think as long as the Ukrainians are receiving economic support from the West, diplomatic support from the West, and military support, particularly key aspects, key weapon systems like HIMARS, key munitions, aircraft, tanks, that the Ukrainian population, as many populations on the receiving end of an invasion, that they will likely be able to continue to fight on.
If you were to tell me that the European Union was about to launch its 10th round of sanctions, that one or two countries, Russia applying its malign influence, its economic tools it has used, weaponizing energy, weaponizing food, would have changed Europe's calculation, I would have said likely. There were many divisions, there were many cracks that Russia could have exploited. But thus far, the European Union has remained very much united and very much in solidarity with Ukraine. And I would say the same thing here. Despite some fracturing, there is strong bipartisan support for Ukraine.
And we begin with breaking news. President Biden is in Kyiv, Ukraine, right now, the country's capital, as that country prepares to mark 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion.
President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. No one can turn away their eyes from the atrocities Russia is committing against the Ukrainian people. It's abhorrent. It's abhorrent.
In year 2, the human dimension of this war will loom ever larger. We should anticipate widening cracks, greater migration, continued high battlefield losses, trauma, and economic decline. Ukraine is in a race against time in which the Western alliance has both a moral and strategic obligation to stay the course, to do more, and to do better. The Ukrainian nation remains acutely dependent on its external allies and cannot afford, at this historic moment, any softening of that support.
I'm sure I did that. Great.
Just give me 90 seconds.
Great.
But we just got to reroute some audio and stuff, so give us 60 seconds or so.
We have 2 guests joining us by Zoom, and getting them lined up is going to just take a second. Well, while we're doing that, I can also tell you a little bit about how we've been working here at the Miller Center since the outbreak of the war, at the suggestion of Cristina Lopez Guittardi-Chow, who you all know if you come to our events. She said, what if we pull together a group of faculty from across UVA to just have some Zoom conversations about what's going on? And that group of faculty has met pretty much at least once a week, every week through the summer. I think we took 2 weeks off over the Christmas holidays. And there's typically 15 to 20 UVA faculty joining, typically around 9 to 20 UVA faculty to just assess what's been going on. And then we've had a series of guests join us every few weeks, including often joined by our governing council, to just take stock of where things are. And it's a group of people who are experts on Russia and Ukraine, as well as the global economic dimensions, including aid flows and food flows and the like, as well as, importantly, the Chinese dimension of the crisis. We're really gifted and fortunate here to have a group of first-rate China scholars who serve UVA and also have served this project. So it's allowed us to stay abreast of what's going on, and particularly with the involvement of Steve giving us a perspective of the humanitarian dimension to it. We've tried to stay abreast and have a multi-view perspective. So with that, Mike, have I filibustered long enough? Ready to go, great. Let me introduce some of our additional guests who are with us. You've already met Justin. I'll start with Seth Jones, who is Senior Vice President and the Harold Brown Chair and the Director of the International Security Program at CSIS. And he's also the Director of Transnational Threats Projects at CSIS. Experience in government, academia, several books, worked at the RAND Corporation. Seth, it's really great to have you with us. All of our guests, as you saw, are in the film, except for Justin, who made the film. Many of you already know Steve Morrison, who's the center's James Schlesinger Distinguished Professor. That was a professorship endowed by former Secretary of Defense and former Secretary of Energy James Schlesinger here at the university to bring in senior former practitioners. Steve and I got to work with Steve in my first job in government at the Policy Planning Office at the State Department. Steve's also been at USAID and has been running the Global Health Center at Health Policy Center at CSIS for well over a decade, touching on a range of different issues. So Steve, it's great to have you back with us. On the screen, Tatiana Deshko is a public health expert in Ukraine and the director of the international programs for the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. In that role, she has worked extensively on HIV/AIDS reduction in Ukraine, which is, I think, how Steve and the team here, Steve and Justin, got to know her. Her work has helped to dramatically reduce infections, and Ukraine is now internationally recognized as a guide to the best response practices for concentrated HIV epidemics. Obviously, the war has shifted her focus to the immediate and urgent issues facing Ukraine, and we're just so thrilled that she was able to join us today. And then finally, Sarah Charles is an assistant to the administrator of USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the lead government agency responsible for international disaster response. Over nearly 20 years of working in international humanitarian relief space, she has led worldwide assistance for emergencies in Syria, Iraq, South Sudan, and elsewhere. So thank you both for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you. Let me start with Seth to just do a quick touch base on where we are in the war. Russia started the war will continue as long as Russia wants the war to continue. What is the state of the Russian campaign, the state of their army, and the state of Russian costs and resources as they continue to wage the war?
Well, I think it's important to start the answer to that question by going back to last year around this time. So the way, as we were looking at satellite imagery, talking to US government officials in January and then into February of the war, and then as we began to see it play out after the Russians invaded, the strategy, I think we can now characterize it based on the discussions with Russian soldiers that have been captured, intelligence that's been analyzed from signals and human intelligence by US and Western agencies, what we call a blitzkrieg strategy, where Russian armor moved both from Belarus and from Russia itself with a goal essentially to try to take the capital, Kyiv, and major cities. That obviously did not succeed. The Ukrainians mounted an extraordinary defense of their own country, I mean, really an extraordinary defense. And then the war moved from that blitzkrieg strategy to one of attrition. We've seen attrition warfare in the past, not just in World War II or World War I, but we've seen many instantiations of attrition warfare. So as we look at the lines of contact today, you see all of the characteristics of attrition warfare. You see trenches, you see berms developed, you see tanks, main battle tanks, you see all of the artillery scarring of areas. And part of the Russian approach is what we call in the kind of military sphere, a punishment campaign. In military operations, to try to coerce a foreign population or foreign military, you can target its ability to run its military, what you'd call coercion by denial.
That is, target its industrial base, destroy its tanks so it actually can't fight a war. The Russian approach has been less that, because it can't go after the industrial bases of the West. It's been coercion by punishment. That is, targeting the population of the country that it's fighting against, really to wear it down, wear the morale down. And that's why we're seeing such horrific atrocities across the Ukrainian population. Just one last comment, it's also taken extraordinary toll among Russian soldiers. The British Defense Intelligence released estimates of 40 to 60,000 Russian fatalities. Our numbers are a little bit higher because if you include the militias from Luhansk and Donetsk, and the private military contractors and Russian regulars, probably up closer to 60 to 70,000 Russian fatalities.
And just to give context to that, in the 10 years of US engagement in Vietnam, we lost about 50,000 people, 50,000 US soldiers.
Yeah.
Right. So this is all in 1 year.
This is all 1 year. And actually, to put this into Russian and Soviet historical context, this is more Russian deaths than in all Russian and Soviet wars combined since World War II. That's combined, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Chechnya, Afghanistan. It's taken an extraordinary toll on Russian society, at least those that are fighting right now. So that gives one a sense of the context here.
Mm-hmm. All right, one minute about the state of the Ukrainian army, and then I'm going to turn to Tatiana to give us a sense of what life is like on the ground in Ukraine right now, Ukrainian people and public morale. But how's the Ukrainian army holding up?
Well, look, in attrition warfare, the predominant suffering comes from the targeting of tanks and infantry, and so it's taken a significant toll on the Ukrainian army and any of the foreign legion that's been deployed to Ukraine. One of the things we are seeing, interestingly, is when Russians are generally injured, so casualties, they do not return to the front lines. What's been stunning on the Ukrainian side is the large number of casualties we've seen on Ukraine, how many people want to come back and continue to defend their country against an external invasion. So the Ukrainian side has suffered enormously, and you can see it along any of the frontline areas. Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have lost a significant number in the Eastern Front right now, as have the Russians as well.
Mm-hmm. Tatiana, thank you again. We're so honored to have you with us. Tell us about your life, your own family journey through this, and your own sense of how life in Ukraine is going now, and what you perceive it to feel like over the coming months and years.
A pleasure to welcome you, and thanks for being part of the program. It feels not like a year, it feels like 5 years during this last days. And it's been the most difficult time for me and for my family. We've been scattered as never before. When the first explosions happened almost in the backyard of our apartment building, we've been leaving Kiev to Lviv. We've been evacuating other people. As Alliance for Public Health, we started to focus on humanitarian work. We helped to evacuate people, to bring humanitarian cargoes, and we were living in the office, and this is where we felt ourselves safe. I evacuated my mother. She nearly died on the way to Netherlands, and she's living there now as a refugee. My father is a professor in the university in Kiev. He's teaching online because there are not enough bomb shelters to organize face-to-face teaching. Some of his students are abroad, some are on occupied territories too. We are living with today. We are not long-term planners anymore, and we are ready for any scenario, whatever can happen. We have our bags packed in case sirens alarm happens. We have canisters of gasoline, and we are ready for any development. In the office, we have warned our staff not to come to the office this week because of the fear of casualties that may happen in the anniversary of invasion. But what was very rising our spirit is when Joe Biden came to Kiev. It was a strong sign of support, and it was truly standing with Ukraine, literally, and we are very, very thankful for that. But for people in Ukraine, it is really a spectrum of very difficult situations. And, 70% of Ukrainian army are ordinary civilian people. They are IT people, they are cafe workers, they are historians, and they learned how to fight to protect their families, to protect Ukraine. Economy is in a very difficult situation now. 20% of territory is occupied, 35% of people are out of Ukraine. It's a massive migration of people out of the country. 60% of the national budget is a military budget, and it is so difficult to see how economy is really shrinking and is virtually is coming to zero. Families are apart. Men are staying in Ukraine while women with children have left, and it is good that they have the opportunities to study, and they have been so warmly received in these welcoming countries. But I think what is really important is that Ukrainians now are as proud and united as they have never been before. I think the war has taught us to focus on what matters most. And things became very clear in terms of, masks are down, and we see who the killer state is. We see who Russia truly is. And that's been the situation throughout the history of Ukraine and the Soviet Union. Every family would have someone who was killed by Soviet regime. Either it would be a priest or a rich peasant or a dissident or a famine survivor. It's been like that for decades. And unfortunately, the killer regime, Soviet regime, has never been punished for that. And it finally must be punished for that. There is very strong resilience in everything what happens in Ukraine. People are fighting, people are volunteering, people are donating and doing whatever they can. The war has made us stronger.
Tatiana, thank you so much for that. Can you give us a sense how much is fighting and being in the war for civilians? How much has that come to define everyday life? Is there a real economy, or is the war the thing that keeps people focused and going day to day? And I ask that because I would love to know, how can we help? What is the most effective aid that we can give an economy and a people that's at war?
People are not only fighting on the front line, and actually you see a lot of military people in the streets as you walk around. Also, you see a lot of veterans of war. You see many people without legs or without hands, young men, and you see fewer people in the streets as well. And unfortunately, Russia has been targeting civilian infrastructure and electricity infrastructure so strongly that everyone has sensed the feeling, the sense of war. But we are happy we could survive winter. We have the warm clothes, the power banks and electricity and gas stations, and we can see that it is easy. You can survive without electricity easily. But the damage is growing in geometric progression. people are medications cannot be delivered to patients, and medical assistance cannot come to elderly people who have died so often during this year. People have been 40% of the territory of Ukraine is mined, and people have been exploding on these mines in the fields when they were trying to work on agriculture, or in Odessa beaches, and we saw so many casualties because of this very wild way of ordinary life that people are having these days.
Thank you, Tatiana. Sarah, I'd love to bring you in now and hear about how the U.S. government has been helping. We know that there's been about $50 billion of assistance. Obviously, a lot of that is on the military side, but a lot of that's also on the humanitarian relief side. Tell us a little bit about that, how you've structured those funds, where your priorities are, and who your partners are in that effort.
As you've mentioned, nearly $50 billion in support to Ukrainians over this last year, but a pretty extraordinary for USAID. $15 billion of that is going through USAID. The vast majority of that, nearly $13 billion, with a significant amount more to be announced tomorrow, is in the form of direct budget support. And that really is supporting the resilience of Ukrainian communities and the Ukrainian state. I think the real story that was captured in the documentary was a story of resilience, and that's why so much of the aid investments have been made, in particular in the Ukrainian state, in order to deliver on the Ukrainian people's basic needs. So that direct budget support is going directly to support 2,000 health facilities, to pay 500,000 healthcare workers. The balance of the support has been primarily in humanitarian assistance. That's what my bureau manages. Nearly $1.9 billion in humanitarian assistance, $1.4 billion of that inside of Ukraine, the remainder to support Ukrainian refugees in the region. But that $1.4 billion, it runs the gamut from direct cash payments to Ukrainians that are on the move. A huge portion in the last several months has been winterization support, so heating support to collective facilities, generators, fuel, efforts to really help Ukrainians survive Russia's onslaught against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, particularly that energy infrastructure. And then aid has also been focused on supporting the resilience of the economy. So investments in the agricultural sector, as well as using our diplomatic efforts, our programming dollars to support initiatives like the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So even using our humanitarian funding to help some of the first purchases of grain coming through the World Food Program out of that Black Sea ports to really feed the world, but also to instill confidence in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which in turn has put resources into the pockets of Ukrainian farmers. So a really wholesale effort to support the Ukrainian people and support the resilience of Ukrainian institutions.
And looking forward, Sarah, what do you worry about? What keeps you up at night? I mean, there's so much. The human cost is so high. There's so much horror in this war, and yet we all have to stay focused on how we can help. What worries you the most as you try to deliver this aid?
We lost her.
Oh, we may have lost her. Steve, let me turn to you. There's been a broad global diplomacy around aid and assistance. I think we're all so moved by Ukraine's courage and their resilience over the course of the year. How is the rest of the world responding in this moment?
A couple of answers to that. The Munich Security Conference just met last weekend. That's a major security forum, transatlantic alliance. And what was really striking about that gathering was the remarkable unity of the transatlantic alliance in support of Ukraine. I mean, a year ago when they met, it was a very fractured and divided community. And the year before that, at the advent, in February of 20, as the pandemic was just beginning, the theme then was Westlessness, i.e., that there wasn't much that you could describe as a unified Western perspective, and this has been transformed. First point. Second is the full and honest recognition of the absolute imperative of U.S. leadership in this, in getting us to this point. And the vice president's speech, followed by the president's visit to Kyiv, followed by the speech in Poland, just brought that all to life very, very dramatically. Also elevating the whole agenda of accountability for these excesses in terms of international humanitarian law. So that comes across, but I would say on the more disquieting side, low-income and middle-income countries are not with the United States and the transatlantic alliance. They're hedging their bets. They're on the fence. The fact that China may be tilting, and Seth can say more about this, may be tilting towards an overt strategic alliance with Russia with a security dimension, that has a harrowing implications in terms of hardening up much more of a new Cold War confrontation and that possibility. And I'd say also there's disquiet about what happens here electorally in 2 years. Does that dissolve this unity? And most importantly is just the sense that this is hugely costly and expensive. The economy in Ukraine is fragile and in decline, the human cost, and simply keeping that going forward is a huge challenge. And I think people are beginning to recognize what we've heard from Tanya and from Sarah, the magnitude of this effort and this mobilization is extraordinary. And so the sustainability of that, we have to keep an eye on that. And the last point is, it's not in anyone's real interest to dwell too much on the true gravity of the human crisis within Ukraine. It draws attention to dimensions of this which can undermine the valor and the courage and unity of those struggling. So you don't want to be seen in that regard. It may signal to Putin that his strategy is working. And yet we have to keep a close eye on this. The aerial campaigns that started in October against the power grid and the water systems and civilian residences and the like have universalized the assault upon communities across Ukraine. And it's a little hard to sort of gauge that. And we're still beginning to try and estimate exactly how much excess mortality, how much has the health system collapsed in key places, how much trauma and mental health disorder is this society in, and how much to compensate for that, how much to up the mitigation strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Sarah, you cut out after I was posing a question. I'm not sure if you heard the full question, but my question was, and I can see you've done what we've all done at some point during Zoom. One camera didn't work, so you've gone to another. It feels like we have you on your phone. What keeps you up at night? What are you worrying about? We've all watched this tragedy, and we all, I think, all feel enormous sympathy and compassion for what's going on the ground in Ukraine. But as a practical day-to-day matter, moving resources and assistance or coordinating with other allies, where are you focusing your energies going forward?
Yeah, I think Steve and Tatiana did a very good job, as did the documentary, of highlighting those attacks on civilian infrastructure. I mean, the sheer scale of destruction, our ability to keep up, and our ability to support the Ukrainian government and their efforts to keep up with the repairs and with the patchwork support to address some of those just relentless destruction of the civilian infrastructure. Certainly keeps me up at night. The degradation that we've seen over time of for example, the health sector and certainly the energy sector, although again, tremendous resilience that we've seen in both of those spaces. Also humanitarian access. Tatiana talked about the mines, the cost of those mines, but there are large swaths of Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine that we just don't have access to. The government doesn't have access, humanitarian actors don't have access. We know conditions there are quite dire, and we know that the Russians have shown no interest in meeting the basic needs of the civilians that are living in occupied Ukraine. So those are areas that we're very concerned about, and that I'm spending a lot of time with my counterparts in other governments, with the UN, looking at ways to kind of open up access again in non-government controlled areas. And then finally, I'd say, you know, I just came from southern Turkey. I saw Steve on my way back, where I was meeting with a lot of partners that are working in northwest Syria. And again, the documentary did a good job of highlighting the commonalities between Russia's tactics in northwest Syria, or in Syria rather, and their tactics in Ukraine. And what we've seen in both places, again, is the indiscriminate, or perhaps discriminate, the deliberate targeting of health facilities, of humanitarian installations, and of civilian architecture. And you know, just this past week, we've seen attacks on 3 humanitarian installations. The documentary highlighted more than 700 attacks on health facilities. This is a very difficult place for Ukrainians. This is a very difficult place for the humanitarian community to work, again, because of the tactics that Russia is using in waging this war.
Thank you, Sarah. For the audience, both here and on Zoom, please submit your questions. We'll turn to those in just a few minutes. I've got a couple more questions here, and we'll turn to those questions. I want to bring Justin in. As you've tried to capture the enormity of this, right? It's a combination of extraordinary human suffering, a real military battle, something that has global dimensions to it, both in terms of the world watching, the world contributing, the world trying to work around the economics. How do you focus on core messages and communicating them as you've worked through a number of different film projects over the years? This must be coming at you like a fire hose every day.
I'm not really used to talking about how the sausage is made, but I'll try to do my best.
Okay.
Basically, I mean, for me, and this kind of goes back to my experiences as a journalist, I think the most compelling and the most important story is the human story. So the degree to which we can illuminate a conflict and show folks on the ground. We had Dmitry Shrimbe, for example. He's an NGO head over in Ukraine talking about the 2 people he lost delivering drugs. So I think first and foremost, I think we try to focus on that. How can we draw that out? How can we bring some characters in? How can we focus on that? And then unfortunately, Steve and I have a lot of experience with the barbarianism of Russia's tactics and other organizations. So we have a lot of people who know about this at our disposal. So we've been very fortunate to bring them into the conversation. And Steve and I will usually have a few conversations about who we can get and who we think might be the best on this topic. And usually we come up with a very good mix. And we go through that a variety of ways. I was texting Nick Schifrin. I was pestering him throughout his trip to Ukraine to come on. And sometimes that's what it takes. And sometimes it's just a quick phone call.
Tanya, as you followed the reporting on the war, both on the ground in Ukraine and given your global contacts and connections, are there storylines that you think we in the United States need to know about and need to continue to stay focused on? Tatiana, I don't know if you heard that question. As you follow the media coverage, both at home in Ukraine and here in the States, are there particular things that you want us to stay focused on and continue to follow and know about?
The stories are a very difficult human stories of living in the time of war. These are stories of people who are fighting on the front line, people who have changed their life completely to actually become a warrior, a defender of your country, and change the whole situation for your family and for people close to you, and to give your life away. These are stories of people who are so resiliently fighting in their daily life, in their everyday work, who are working so hard to bring victory closer every day, who are organizing support for those who cannot help themselves. And we, as Alliance for Public Health, we often, we have started coming to the occupied territories in the north of Ukraine, in east of Ukraine, in the south, and we come with mobile ambulances there. And we see people who, and the ambulance comes and there is no one around, but then in some minutes people start, coming from nowhere, and they are elderly people, they are people who cannot really support themselves easily, and sometimes this is the first time they have seen a medical doctor or have received medication in the last half a year's time. So situation for those people is the most difficult. We've been trying to support disabled people recently who have stayed very close to the front line or in the occupied territories, and apparently there is very little specialized support available for them. So we are now thinking about organizing a shelter for people like this. So these military and human and the stories of those who are most vulnerable in this war. Many elderly people have died during this conflict, not because of the stress, because of the emotional situation, but also because inavailability to receive the support necessary. I think these are the lines that could be more brought to the focus, so that more maybe support and more solutions could be found to these people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. A question from the webinar for Seth. So has the Russian spring surge begun? There seem to be conflicting opinions about this, but we've been hearing for some time, including President Zelensky saying that it was coming. Has it come? Has it begun? Or do you still think we're going to see something even more dramatic coming from the Russian side?
So I think what we can say is that there has been an increased push, particularly in areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, around Bakhmut, where we have seen the Russians intensify their artillery strikes, where we've seen additional Russian infantry, main battle tanks, artillery pushed in to try to break through Ukrainian lines. What we don't see, at least yet, is another aspect that some have wondered is whether we'd see an increase in Russian forces on the Belarus border, an additional attack onto Kyiv itself, massing of additional forces down in the south to try to retake areas of Kherson that the Russians lost in the fall of 2022. We don't see that at this point. I think what there does appear to be some likelihood that we'll see the Russians continue to push to use the 300,000 soldiers that they mobilized over the last several months and look for potential vulnerabilities in the Ukrainian line, and then to try to, through a really attrition warfare, to try to break through and surround Ukrainian forces in areas like Bakhmut. But at this point, the offensive, I think, has started. We see a surge in activity in the Eastern Front. What we don't see at this point is what I would call we haven't seen the end of it. And I think we'll see over the course of the spring, I expect to see the Russians pushing on multiple fronts.
Mm-hmm. Steve, you suggested, there's another question from the webinar, you suggested that particularly at the Munich conference, either European or either other global onlookers wondering if U.S. support will waver. Can you reflect on the possible circumstances in which it might end, or are there limits to, you think, you've been a watcher of U.S. foreign assistance for as long as I've known you, which is a long time. How do you see, what's the worst case scenario in the U.S. and how might that play out?
Well, let me start with the best case that we've seen, which was interesting that at the Munich Security Conference, it was the largest congressional delegation in its history. And this goes back to the early 60s. So there was a strategy of getting bipartisan leadership from both the House and Senate there for a reason. And that reason is to think beyond the current fiscal year. We front-loaded over $105 billion of assistance into this war effort, covering all of those different dimensions. But we have to worry about what happens in the next fiscal year. And we're heading into a different dynamic within Congress, clearly, and we're heading into an electoral cycle. And we've already begun to see the degree to which there is a skeptical argument around the value of this and how long does this go? What is the end state that we're driving towards? What would a solution look like? And how to sustain a very strong bipartisan base of support within Congress and within the American people to carry us into this next phase, because it's not clear that there's an end game in sight yet. We aren't at that point. We can begin to talk about what a negotiated settlement might look like, but there's no evidence that Putin is entertaining that possibility in any serious way. So I do think that there is a significant risk that we could see an erosion of support. We could see a campaign begin from mostly from the right about the value of this and whether we should begin to scale back, and are we paying a price domestically for this? And we should anticipate that. And I think what we're seeing is anticipation, as demonstrated by the amazing presence from members of Congress in Munich in support of the transatlantic alliance. So we need to think about telling the American public again what it is that we are achieving through this investment, the uncertainty that we have to cope with, and what the end state will look like eventually. But we have to live with uncertainty, and we have to live with our responsibilities and continue to play on those. I don't see major cracks in American opinion at this moment. I see Ukraine flags all over small communities in America. Seth, I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, just briefly. I mean, I've been really impressed, and I think Munich was impressive to see both Republican and Democratic leadership stand up. And I think, the media does spend a lot of time looking at the outliers right now on both the Democratic and Republican Party, which have raised a lot of questions about the continuation of U.S. assistance. But I do think right now we see the centers of both parties willing to continue to support Ukraine diplomatically, economically, and militarily. And I think what that means is, at least for the foreseeable future, the U.S. will be there.
Tatiana, I'm curious, given the enormous suffering, but also the enormous courage, how do people in Ukraine talk about war aims at this point? Obviously, it's defending and protecting Ukraine, but in as much as there's also been talk about a Ukrainian spring surge and trying to push Russia back, is that the widely shared feeling and goal of average Ukrainian citizens?
What every Ukrainian would be asking for and think about during the meetings on Ukraine is about weapons supply to Ukraine. As a year ago has shown, not preparing for war, not having the necessary ammunition, not having the necessary weapons does not protect you and does not stop war entering your house. So we need to have not only the opportunity to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, but also have the weapons that would enable us fire back, that would enable us to prevent Russia from making these strikes on Ukraine. This is our number one request, because this war every day has an incredible human toll for our people, for our land. And there is an enormous dedication of people to fight and to be on the front line. And what we need these are weapons, and we need weapons today to be able to have free Ukraine tomorrow.
So many great questions here. A question to anybody on the panel. I really would love to hear this one. How can American youth and students aid the Ukrainian effort? I will say this, as I've reflected on this war, what seems so very different in my lifetime, going back to as a kid watching the US engagement in Vietnam, the broad unity of American support, and mostly because of the unity and courage in Ukraine, seems so profound. And yet, because we're not on the ground involved in the war, the question of how we help other than through our tax-paying checkbooks, what more can we do? What more can particularly young people do?
Sarah.
Sarah, have you
I was
got
going to say, I'm happy to jump in on this. I mean, I think there are a few different ways that young people can help. One is, Steve talked about this. There has been extraordinary bipartisan support so far for Ukraine's fight for survival. I think young people making it known. We're not supposed to instruct people how to lobby Congress, but making it known that they're supportive of this effort, that they're behind the Ukrainian people, that they want to see U.S. leadership in support of Ukraine is critically important. I also think, we've welcomed a lot of Ukrainians to the U.S. in over the last year, and working through organizations like Welcome U.S. To support Ukrainians that are either temporarily or longer term making life here is another way. And then finally, supporting local organizations that are working on the ground in Ukraine, providing the kind of support that Tatiana highlighted to those that can't leave, particularly the elderly, particularly those that are close to the front lines. We have a website at USAID called CIDI.org that has a number of vetted and trusted organizations that we know are working on the ground and can channel resources to people that need them the most. And I would imagine while your students probably don't have a lot of extra change to throw their way, could certainly work and support boosting those efforts, arranging fundraisers, and getting resources again to those that are on the front lines.
That's really great. Let me ask one final question. We've got about 7 minutes left and go around and get people's closing thoughts as a general matter, but on this particular thing, it groups together several questions here. There's one about a continuation of Soviet scorched earth tactics, one about how geopolitics might settle down 5 to 10 years from now. What I'm curious to hear is a human rights thread through this. We saw Vice President Harris talk about war crimes. War crimes is a particularly tough stain on a country. If Russia is perpetuating war crimes, that will affect how it as a country is viewed, how its leadership is viewed, how its soldiers and maybe even parts of its civilian economy is viewed. And I'd love to hear each of you talk about that we now have a Russian state that is likely to be a pariah for years to come unless something dramatic happens inside Russia. From each of your perspectives, how should we be thinking about Russia's role in geopolitics and the world economy over the next decade?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think we're going to see more of the same. Obviously, we've seen this in Syria. We've seen this in other conflicts in Chechnya. I mean, that's how Russia responds. And one thing that we've noticed that the media coverage of this conflict has been enormous. And probably haven't seen as much in about 20 years. And that's because the interest of the American public is so high. It's also because the disinterest in other conflicts is so low. So I think we need to, yes, we should be looking at Ukraine, and we should be very encouraged that people are looking at other people around the planet as some people that we should be helping. But I do think we should also just broaden our scope to look at what's happening in other places, because these are active conflicts and the wounds are taking place every day.
Just to add to that, I think there is an enormous opportunity to look and investigate at Russian activity in Ukraine that we have not had in Syria or in Chechnya. The Russians conducted mass atrocities in both wars. In Chechnya, they killed journalists that conducted investigations. Because Chechnya lies inside of Russian territory, they were able to prevent investigations of those atrocities in Chechnya. Same thing in Syria with the Assad regime, including the use of chemical weapons against the Syrian population. They're not going to get away with it in Ukraine, and we have to hold them accountable now. They failed to overrun the country. They failed to take Kyiv. The borders are open, so we've been able to get people in, get assistance in, get the US president in. We have to, moving forward, do serious substantive investigations of Russian activity and hold them accountable. Names, people, we're not going to all get them in front of the Hague in any meaningful time. It took years, decades, in the case of the former Yugoslavia. But I think we've got to start those proceedings, the collection of evidence, and we have to hold the country responsible. It's been interesting to watch on the sports front, the athletics front, how the Russian teams have been banned from the World Cup, both the women's and the men's World Cup for soccer. They were banned over the winner from the World Junior Hockey Tournament, which is a big sport in Russia. And that imposes a cost to some degree on the government that has imposed this war on Ukraine.
Steve, you mentioned in your comments about Munich that the world is not united on this. A lot of lower income and middle income countries are either neutral or maybe even support Russia because they have ongoing economic or military relations. There was a story in the Washington Post today about how 3 of the biggest democracies in the developing world, India, Brazil, and South Africa, are sort of there. They're neutral, if not Russian leaning in this sense. So given that war crimes seem so pronounced, and given that the UN has a role in war crimes, and yet these other major players right now aren't there, how do you see that playing out?
Couple of thoughts. First of all, the US government has never done what it did last week, which is you have a vice president saying, we have proof and we are convinced that we have the evidentiary basis for prosecution of war crimes. That's unprecedented. The president in his remarks walked right up to that same line in terms of atrocities. So the US government is shifting itself into a posture it has refused to go to. And that's profound. There is a movement afoot within Europe, starting with Poland and the Baltics, but widening now for the proposition of a special tribunal on acts of aggression. We have not seen a special tribunal of that kind since Nuremberg. And so that decision is on the horizon as to whether you can build a sufficient coalition. The United States is not there yet, Germany, France not there yet, and the wider environment. If we have an accountability mechanism like a special tribunal, the International Criminal Court, something attached to the EU, if it remains simply within the transatlantic alliance, it has the risk of not having broad enough legitimacy and standing in the world. Russia's been able to keep its economy going pretty strongly in this period, and it's because it has remained able to tap those markets, the purchases from the Chinese, the Indians, and many other marketplaces. And we have to live with that reality and have a strategy of taking that up. I just want to make one other point, which is we heard from Christian DeVos, Physicians for Human Rights. This is a very important instance of an international organization partnering with 3 different Ukrainian non-governmental bodies in conducting a very, very careful evidentiary analysis of these attacks. And if you go read that report that was issued 2 days ago, it has remarkably detailed evidence in that report that is deliberately compiled in order to bring it to the prosecutors to say, here you have it, now it's in your lap to move forward. And that sort of thing is remarkably important and valuable, and it's demonstrating the capacity of Ukrainians to carry forward that type of evidence gathering in the midst of war. Mm-hmm. We're not waiting. Mm-hmm. And the other point I'd make is that we have to think about reconstruction now. If the economy's dropped by 40% and it drops another 20%, we're talking about a survival economy that is ever more dependent upon cash transfers, as we've heard from Sarah. You know, the magnitude, the scale of EU and US cash transfers to keep the lights on is going to become ever more important. But that's keeping things alive. But we need to think beyond that. We need to begin to think about what is the reconstruction strategy. And we only have rhetoric at the moment. Mm-hmm. We don't have a clear strategy. We know that there's $300 billion of Russian assets that are frozen, sovereign funds that are frozen, 300 billion. There's money out there that can begin to be put to use. It's complicated legally and politically, and it gets to your point about if it's strictly within the transatlantic alliance, it may be more difficult to move in a deliberate way to seize those assets and turn those assets towards reconstruction. Mm-hmm. And we haven't crossed that bridge yet. But we need to. Time is not on our side. We cannot wait another year or two to get serious about reconstruction and how to finance it and how to organize it in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Tatiana, Tanya, I'd love to bring this to a close with you, particularly the sense that you have of both Ukrainian national identity and how that sits with Russia. My sense, our sense, I think, is that Russia and Ukraine have a long, complicated history, but also a history of oftentimes within families and across families, people who know each other really well. Has this war now permanently driven a wedge between the Russian people and the Ukrainian people? Do you feel that Ukraine is going to be in a period of grieving and not forgiving and feeling anger and resentment toward Russia for many, many years to come? How does that all feel to you, or is it just too much to think about while you're trying to live day to day?
Ukraine is fighting a war for values. It is really something that Americans understand so well. It is fighting for democracy. We are fighting for the ability to have free elections, something that Russia has not had for decades. We are fighting for freedom of speech, for freedom of press. We are fighting for rule of law and for checks and balances. This is something that is part of our identity and is part of our values. And this is something as far as possible from the KGB-run, schizophrenic and narcissist Russian regime. Ukrainians have a very simple dream. The dream is to live in freedom. And we are sure that it's been the most difficult year, but we have lived this year in dignity. And we really so long deserve the price that Ukraine has paid. It is our victory.
Tatiana, thank you. Sarah, thank you. Steve, Seth, and Justin, thank you. This has really just been extraordinary for all of the hard work that all of you do for this incredible year and of suffering and courage in Ukraine. And thanks to you all. I know that we will continue to do programming in this space here at the Miller Center, and we're just really appreciative of all the support from our community. I want to thank the Miller Center team, the War Room, as we call it, our weekly Zoom team. Many of our scholars are here for this event, but also the great communications and events and development and all the other players here at the Miller Center that allow us to do this work. So thank you all, and best of luck, and our warmest wishes to all of you in Ukraine. Tatiana, thank you again so much.